Why don't you say it, baby? Not like I don't mind, but we're so toxic lately. Don't you waste my time. Who you been fucking faking like I'm out of sight? This love ain't real and we don't feel right. It's me or them, but you won't decide. So won't you let go? Don't wanna hear it call another time.
It's rare that we have good outcomes in the true crime community, but this is one of them. Riker Webb was 3 years old when he went missing on June 3rd of this year from his family's home in Montana. For reasons unknown, he wasn't reported missing until 2 hours after his disappearance. But after police were notified, a massive search was launched involving ATVs, drones, bloodhounds, and a boat to search the Bull Lake area. The Montana Air National Guard even used helicopters to join the search, but no trace of little Riker was found. A code red alert was sent out to everyone in the area to search their properties, and 2 days later, Riker was found alive. He was found 48 hours after he went missing in the small town of Troy in northwestern Montana, which is roughly 2 miles from his home. He survived by taking shelter in a shed and was found after the owners heard a faint whimper. Little Riker was then found inside of a lawnmower bag. When authorities found him, he was visibly shaken and scared, but appeared healthy. Riker told authorities that he went for a long walk by himself, but then he got tired. What's really crazy though is that Riker, at just 3 years old, left clues as to which way he was going. He loves bugs, and along his path to the shed, he would overturn some rocks, just like a little kid who loves bugs would do. Riker was reunited with his family and taken to a local hospital to be evaluated. He's expected to make a full recovery. But according to the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, the case is still open as they're looking into why the parents waited 2 hours to report Riker missing. According to them, they and CPS are looking into possible cases of negligence and endangerment within the family. But overall, I'm just thankful Riker was found alive. This case was requested by one of you guys, so whoever you are, thank you. And if you have any other case that you want me to cover, there's a link in my bio to do that.
If you ever see an old black baby carriage sitting on the side of the road, this is why you should never go up to it and look inside. So there is this legend that everyone was talking about back when I was a kid, and it really used to freak me out. It's about this woman who saw a creepy baby carriage on the side of the road as she was driving home from work, and there was no one around it. It was just sort of sitting there by itself. So she pulled over, walked over to it, and it had this cotton blanket sort of sitting on top of it. So she pulled it off to look inside and instantly grew pale. She got back in her car and drove all the way home. That night, she didn't eat, she didn't sleep, and every time her husband asked her what was wrong, she refused to talk about it. About a month later, she packed her bags and left home, and no one ever saw her again. But she left behind this one note for her husband. It was not in her handwriting, and it was old and worn, and when he read it, it said, "Whoever reads this note will be doomed to a cursed life, unless they pass it on." So whoever put this baby carriage on the side of the road cursed this woman, and everything in her life was going wrong, which is why she wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, and it wasn't until she passed on the note that her life would become back to normal. But she really had to do that to her husband? Anyway, it's just like an old campfire story, but it's really creepy.
Let it be known immediately if you see someone who looks like this. Today we're going to talk about one of Korea's worst disappearance cases, the Pocheon Middle School manicure disappearance case. This case has been unsolved for approximately 20 years, and there are some seriously disturbing facts about the case. And yes, it has to do with bright red manicure. One night, Hyuna, a nice middle school girl, was hanging out with her friends. It was getting late and Hyuna decided to go home. At around 6:18 p.m., Hyuna called her mom. Hyuna told her mom that she was going to take an isolated back road because then it would only take about 5 minutes to get home. Hyuna lived in or around Pocheon, a more isolated and spread out area than a busy city like Seoul. Also, nowadays in Korea, you have CCTV cameras everywhere. Back then, not so much. Because she was so close to home, Hyuna's mom assumed that she would be home very soon. She never came home. The police were notified, but she couldn't be found, and it was ruled in what I believe was a runaway. If you knew Hyuna, it didn't make sense because she seemed to have a happy home life. A few weeks later, only a few miles from her house, her notebook, bag, and shoes were found. Not too long later, her cell phone and sneaker shoes were found. Approximately 3 months later, a man was around the area where you see right now. Near the road was a drain. The drain hole was covered by the paper box you see behind me. The man looked inside the drain and was shocked to see what he found. It was Hyuna. She was all crumpled up without anything on, and she was not amongst the living. But there was something even more shocking about her. Her fingernails and toenails were perfectly cut, but even worse, they were delicately painted in a pure red. I'm talking like bright red. Police tried to gather how her body would be crinkled up like that, and the most reasonable conclusion that they would come up with was that she was placed inside a little box, like you see behind me. Now, who did it? To find out, the police went to a nearby nail shop. The police stated that in or around the time that Hyuna disappeared, a pale, frail man came into her shop. The man referred to her as Onni. In Korean, usually only girls call older girls Onni. Man does not usually use Onni. Still, no one could find him. After 16 years of Hyuna's disappearance, a witness finally called in after watching a show. He stated that a week before Hyuna's disappearance, a man in a white car attempted to kidnap her. While she was trapped in her car, she jumped out of the car while it was going. He stated that the man's skin was so pale, as if he were wearing makeup. He also stated that his nails seemed to have some sort of clear manicure. It was almost shiny. The color drawing you see is what we have after her description. When the incident occurred, Hyuna's mom said she didn't want or need anything, she just wanted her daughter back. Police still haven't given up on this case.
So what was Kalala's response to thinking his wife might be cheating on him without any proof? He paid nearly $7,000 to a group of men to kill her. Noella ended up getting news of her stepmother passing away, so she ended up flying back to her hometown for the funeral. This was January 21st of 2015. Kalala ended up calling her on the phone, and he instructed her to go outside and get some fresh air. And she was immediately confronted by an armed man who directed her to get into the vehicle. When she got into the vehicle, there was 2 other armed men waiting for her inside. They then blindfolded her, took her to a warehouse, and tied her to a chair. And instead of doing what they were hired to do, they ended up telling her about Kalala's plan. They had a personal moral rule not to kill women or children. So they let her know that her husband put a hit on her. She did not believe their original claims on what was happening, so they ended up calling Kalala, putting him on speaker, and asking what they should do next, and he responded with kill her. Noella was so shocked by this information that she fainted hearing his response. So this is when they came together to make a plan to get back.
Imagine robbing a bank and never getting caught. This is Ted Conrad, who in 1969, who walked into Society National Bank in Cleveland, took $215,000 out of a vault, got on a plane and went to Boston and lived the rest of his life there. After he robbed the bank, he cut off all communications with his girlfriend, his family, and everyone he knew. He took the new identity of Thomas Randall. He started working at a country club right outside of the city. Then he got into the car business, and that's what he was actually doing until he retired after nearly 40 years. However, right around that time, he actually met a woman who became his wife, and they were married for more than 40 years together. He also had a daughter, so he completely left his old family and began a new family. Anyway, so he was diagnosed with cancer, and he had a secret he wanted to tell everybody. So his wife arranged for all his buddies from the car dealership and everybody he knew to come on over. Some of those people were actually FBI agents who knew him and said that he was such a gentle soul. However, when they got there, the cancer had gotten in his lungs and he did not have a voice anymore. But he didn't leave without confessing to his wife and both his daughter who he really was. FBI had actually been looking for him for 40 years and never found him until he confessed. That was one smart man.
This couple went missing after getting into an argument with their landlord, but during the investigation, he disappeared too. Camden Sylvia and Michael Sullivan lived in a large $300 a month rent-stabilized loft at 76 Pearl Street in Lower Manhattan, New York. Camden worked at a real estate office, and Michael was an actor who worked at an art gallery. Their landlord was Robert Rodriguez, who owned the apartment building as well as a locksmith shop on the ground floor. The couple often argued with Robert over the lack of heat in their apartment. In November of 1997, Robert was having financial problems and was going to increase rent for all of his tenants that would have equaled 10 times the amount Camden and Michael were paying. Robert threatened to completely turn off the heat if the couple didn't agree to the rent increase. So on November 7, 1997, the couple gave Robert a petition to withhold rent if he went through with his threats that was signed by other tenants. And that evening, Camden and Michael went out for a quick jog, but they were never seen again. A few days went by, and when Camden's mom hadn't heard from her, she went to the apartment. She didn't have a key, but she was let in by a neighbor. Their apartment looked normal, their wallets and passports were there, but the only thing that was missing was the couple's running shoes and one set of keys. It looked like they had planned to be right back. Camden's mom reported this to the police, who immediately started an investigation. Police tried to get Robert to give them the keys to the building so that they could search the basement and other areas of the building for the couple, but Robert was gone. He seemingly vanished for 10 whole days, and when he finally returned, he lawyered up and refused to cooperate with investigators. He also initially refused to let authorities search his large property in upstate Orange County, New York. From what I read, they later searched by helicopter, but apparently couldn't see anything. Authorities searched what they could, but they found no trace of the couple. But then, out of nowhere, Robert sold the apartment building. Police heavily searched the building, bringing in cadaver dogs and even tearing up the floors, but they still didn't find anything. But during the investigation into Robert, authorities found that he was using a dead man's identity to commit fraud. He was arrested on tax fraud charges and pleaded guilty to larceny, and he actually spent almost 6 years in prison until he was released in 2004. Adding to this, an associate of Robert's named David King, who was also a co-defendant in a lawsuit with him, mysteriously vanished after getting into a heated argument with Robert back in 1991. David has also never been found. Robert has always denied any involvement in these disappearances and was last reported to be living in the East Harlem neighborhood of New York City.
Alright, so here's some childhood photos of famous killers. Number 1, we have this witch. If you don't know who this is Jodi Arias in high school. Years later in 2008, she would become one of the most infamous criminals in US history. She murdered her ex-boyfriend Travis Alexander by stabbing him around 27 times. She testified saying she did it through self-defense, even though there are pictures that were accidentally taken by a camera during the attack. And if you don't know what guilty looks like, you will after watching these videos of her.
As the jury gets ready to consider a possible death sentence, it was filmed just after her 2008 arrest, and it's a very different side of the woman we saw in court.
Number 2, we have this ugly kid in a dress. And my god, does he look like a 40-year-old midget. If you can't guess who this is, this devil's incarnate eventually becomes one of the most infamous serial killers in California, Richard Ramirez. What makes this man so frightening is that he would choose his victims randomly and murder them in the most gruesome way possible. Despite all his violent crimes, he still managed to get married to a woman in prison, and by the time of his death at age 53, he was engaged with another woman.
Time for another episode of Old Time True Crime. Today I'm talking about the 1905 murder of the Ince family in Whiteley, Arkansas. For content warnings, brutal murder and violence, including the murder of several very young children. I'm also going to share a picture of the perpetrator on the scaffold getting ready to be hanged, but he is standing there, he's fully alive, he is not hanging yet. James and Sarah Ince married in 1899. He was 23, she was 15. They had 3 children in relatively quick succession. Their first son was James, or Jamie, he's right there, and the next son was Willie, who's over there, and there was also a young baby girl named either Selma or Anna. I saw both. And this, obviously, is Sarah Ince. And this is James Ince. At some point in around February 1905, James Ince decided that he was going to murder his entire family and unalive himself. A few weeks later, a neighbor was walking by and saw him sharpening his axe, and he asked him about it, and James said that he had a lot of work to do. The next morning he woke up before anyone in his family, grabbed the axe and smashed in the skulls of his wife and 3 children, who were ranging in age from 4 years down to 4 months. He later claimed that he, ripped open his shirt and held a knife to his heart, planning to unalive himself, but that he lost the nerve. When Sarah didn't show up to her sisters to help milk the cows, her sister came to the home and came upon this brutal crime scene. James walked all the way to nearby Danville, Arkansas, about 12 miles away. He went right to the police and said that an intruder had broken into his home and killed his whole family. The police were immediately suspicious and thought, let's bring him back to the crime scene where the bodies all still were and see if he has an emotional reaction that'll lead to a confession. And that's exactly what happened. He said he didn't know why he did it and that it was all like a horrid dream. At trial, he tried to claim insanity. He said that his own father had killed someone with an axe and was found insane. And that actually is a true story. His father did kill someone with an axe and spent the rest of his life in a mental hospital. The jury didn't buy it, though, and he was found guilty. He did get a new trial and a new inquiry into his sanity, but it all led to the same thing. He was sentenced to death. James was hanged in April 1906. On the scaffold, he asked to speak, and he did for a solid hour and a half. He said that he'd been saved, that he was now a Christian, that he didn't know why he had killed his family, and that he was under an evil influence at the time. James was the last man to be hanged in Yell County, Arkansas. I got this picture from Ancestry. Apparently, this is the audience of people that came to see him be hanged. So there's a vehicle right in front, and then behind you can kind of see the scaffolding and a big crowd of people.
How are you? Here we are again.